passion of mine to come together with the people of God, and really the only intent that I have is to find God. I don't care where I find Him, in what kind of church or in what kind of people, but I want Him. Because I've been disappointed before with religion. I've been abused by people in authority in religions, both when I was a kid growing up and sometimes when I was an adult. But if the story that we read in the Bible is true, God loves us more than we could imagine. And I have figured if I can find that God, then I can find what I need to make it through the dark days. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, as David said. I've always been fascinated by photography in my life. Those of you who remember the Kodak Instamatic cameras and you would drop the little cartridge in, I got one of those for my birthday when I was about 9 years old, and I literally took thousands of slides. I still have those slides. If you want to come over, it'll take days for me to show them to you. But I'd be happy to tell you about the vacations that I went on when I was a kid. But pictures, to me, did something extraordinary. It took a moment of time, and it saved it for the future. And then when you would see extraordinary pictures, not only would you see what everything looked like, if the photographer knew what he was doing, sometimes you could capture emotion also. And I thought, how cool would that be to do something like that, to have that sort of gift to hand down to other people? Well, I think that's what our meeting with God is supposed to do. When we come together for worship, we're grabbing a moment of eternity. And if we do worship right, there's a little bit of emotion woven into it. John chapter 4 says when we worship, we must worship in truth. And we center upon that. What does the Bible say? How are we supposed to do it? But it also says we're to worship in spirit. And that talks about something deep inside of us that's moved. And maybe we don't know why or how, but we know it when we find it. And I want to be a church, a group of people that gathers together and takes those pictures of eternity and brings them down and hands them to the people next to us. It's all about what I started out talking about, finding God. For if I can find God, I will find what I need. Now, wanting to be a photographer, fancying myself as maybe having that gift or talent, when I could afford it least, when I had little kids, I bought a good camera system. A single lens reflex 35 millimeter. The reason I bought it, to be honest with you, is to go out into the woods and take pictures of God's creation. The reason I told my wife I was getting it is so I could take pictures of our kids. And she said, oh, that sounds like a good idea. And so I bought the camera. And right after it was shipped, because the little town that I lived in, you couldn't buy a good camera. It was shipped UPS to our house right before we were leaving on a trip. Well, on that trip, I stopped outside of Lander, Wyoming, and I climbed literally a mountain because I had a telescopic telescopic lens, a telephoto lens. And I wanted to take bighorn sheep pictures because bighorn sheep fascinated me. And so I took them far off and I thought, well, I'm going to get closer. Well, I walked up amongst the sheep until I had to take the telephoto lens off and exchange it for a wide angle, and I got some tremendous, glorious photographs of these majestic animals. And then we went from there to Tetons. And any of you have ever been to the Grand Tetons in Wyoming, you can imagine. In the morning when the sun's coming up, and in the evening when the sun was going down, and in the middle of the day, I was there for 5 days. And I took a couple rolls of film. And I was excited to have them developed, and then you used to have to wait to get them back. And I looked at them and I thought, well, these are pretty good. and I wanted to show them to somebody, and I wanted them to say, wow, look at those mountains. Aren't they beautiful? Look at that sheep. Isn't it majestic? And the person that I showed it to, he goes, wow. And that's the response that I wanted. And he goes again and looked at the next picture. Wow. And I also had a picture of Nathan with his hat on crooked. I still have that picture. He's the first one who ever wore his hat that way. Started a trend. Nathan started the trend that some kids, rappers, still follow. And he looked at Nathan's picture and he goes, oh. But then he looks at the next picture of a sheep and he goes, wow. And I thought, well, Mike, you're a photographer now. You've captured the moment. And he looks at me and goes, wow, Mike, you must really have a neat camera. And I was disappointed because it wasn't about the camera. And I didn't want that to be the response. But I went to worship sometimes, and I've tried to come up with songs like Diana does, or I tried to preach a good lesson, or I tried to have energy in my own life to spread about. And we get done and someone says, well, I like that song. Or it was good getting with the people, or that lesson that Nathan preached or David preached, that was really good. It's not about the camera when you take pictures. And it's not about the picture itself if you've done it right. It's about the object of the picture. And when we come together as a people of God, if it's not about the object of why we come together, then we've missed the mark. I'll give you a little background before we get to 1 Samuel chapter 8. I was reminded when I was studying for this of a story way back in the Old Testament. Genesis chapter 30. To make this neat story quick, Jacob wants a wife, falls in love with this girl from afar off, and would do anything to have her. Well, her dad cheats him into marrying her sister. And he said, no, that's not who I wanted, and goes after the other girl. He knows he needs to support his wife if he's ever going to have kids, and he has a lot of them. He's going to have to support his kids, and so he's trying to deal with his father-in-law. Imagine that. Hardest person to work for in the world is your father-in-law, and he says, tell you what, I don't want any of your sheep, and I don't want you ever to question me. How about I take the spotted ones, because they thought the spotted ones, and I'll take the spotted goats, and I'll use them to make a life. Because shepherds didn't want the black sheep, didn't want the spotted sheep, because they thought there was something wrong with them. And when you sheared the sheep, you'd have two different colors of the wool, and it'd have to be separated. So his father-in-law said, okay, you can have all of the spotted animals. Well, Jacob one day is peeling bark off of a tree to make poles, maybe to build a house. And as he peels the bark off, he stands back and he looks at these striped poles of his. And he notices that when two sheep looked up and saw the striped poles, spotted sheep, they started to mate together. He gets this bright idea. He thinks for some reason they like the poles, and when they see the poles, they mate. And two spotted sheep, guess what they're going to have when they mate together? Spotted babies, and those babies will be mine. So he went about to set up striped poles by where the sheep would drink, and put them where the sheep would sleep, believing that they would mate because of these trees with the bark stripped off. And it so happens that he had a whole bunch of sheep babies, and he became richer than his father-in-law, and he was telling somebody about his craftiness. And he says, you know why I'm so rich? I learned that if you take bark off of a tree and you take that striped pole and put it close to the sheep, it causes them to mate. And an angel of the Lord came to him in Genesis chapter 34 and says, you got it all wrong. It was God who blessed you. And the reason I was thinking about that, because we sometimes think that we have good preaching and good singing and good facilities, and in good pictures and good PowerPoint. When we gather together, then we'll grow. Sometimes when churches grow, they get all proud of themselves and they say, you know, look at what we have done. Mm-hmm. And an angel might come to us, and if there's any blessings at all, say to us, guess what, guys? It always was God. That's the point, if you don't stay with me a little bit longer for the point. The point is, it's always about God. To the sad story, you come down to Samuel's time. Children of Israel were playing the striped poles with the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant, if you don't remember, from Indiana Jones, was that place where God literally dwelt. And they would put it up and worship the Ark, and they would play with the Ark, and they would pray to the Ark, and they would ask the Ark to give them favors. God got tired of it, and after a while removed his presence from the Ark to show them that it wasn't about the Ark. It was about him. And now we come down to 1 Samuel 8. And it came about when Samuel was old that he appointed his son judges over Israel. Now the name of the first one was Joel, and the name of the second Abijah, and they were judging in Beersheba. His sons, however, did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after dishonest gain, and took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, Behold, you have grown old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. And they said, we don't want prophets anymore, because the prophets, the teachers of the Word of God, the people who speak for God, are corrupt. So give us a king, they say. Appoint us a king. What they had forgotten is in Genesis chapter 29, before they ever marched across the Red Sea and saw the power of God, before the plagues ever came upon Egypt and they saw the power of God, it was told there that I have given you a king, and I will give you another, Exodus 29 says. And that other one that was being spoken of was Jesus. Just saying, wait around for the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. But they said, give us a king to judge us like all the nations have. Well, there's a rationale to change things the way we do because everybody else does it that way. I don't want to embarrass Nathan, but this is a true story.
Oh, yes, you do.
Nathan thought I was strict. And I think he would tell you now I was anything but strict. My dad was a terror. He beat me and he demanded of me many, many things. And I did not want to do that to my kids. So I was lenient, I really was. But to tell Nathan to do anything, he thought that was strict. And he wanted to do something.
That's fair.
And he comes to me and he says, in all earnestness, why can't you be like everybody else's dad? And let me do what I want and buy what I want. I'm thinking to myself, yeah, right, I'm sure everybody else's dad is doing that. Why can't you be like everybody else's dad? Brilliant answer. Maybe the only time I knew what to say to him. He didn't understand it. I'm not buying that and carrying the weight for that. He has to bear the responsibility of not catching on to my answer. Why can't you be like everybody else's dad? I said, Nathan, it's because I love you too much.